Prologue. Excerpt from audio logs. Artemisia Niminona, Valley Bay, 6th 10 moon, AC. As a storyteller of Valley Bay, I've tried to keep my skills of weaving words alive. It's difficult at times to find the light, the energy to do this weaving, but I know the words keep me alive. History, our herstory, must be preserved, for Valley Bay is no more, and the wind howling through forests and ruins still burns my eyes with ash. I know it isn't real, but that doesn't stop the tears. I've been hiding in the ruins of the council's keep for 14 days, but I'll be leaving at dawn. It's too dangerous to stay. New hunters come every day, searching for survivors. They'll kill me if they find me. I don't know how many of our records will survive the purging. I hope someday someone hears my story and remembers once there were Amazons on Aggar. Once we stood with blue sights and seers to defend against the Terran invasion, and we were rewarded with death and disease. It's been 3 years now since the Terrans attacked. We thought we'd seen the last of them hundreds of years ago, but it was only a stalemate. 150 years ago, the rulers of the Remains moved the marauding clan, survivors of the first Terran occupation, into the north. They didn't consider the changelings who already lived there. The clan and changelings destroyed each other, and the changelings were all but eradicated. What was left of the clan hid for generations, developing technologies and sending wayward messages to Terran homeworlds. When they were finally heard by their brethren, they threw us away, as we had thrown them away. They helped the Terrans circumvent the forces and defenses of Aggar. They helped them invade. The invaders targeted the blue sites first, a shower of biochemical warfare, nanobots unleashed into the atmosphere, programmed to assassinate anyone with the sight or carrying the gene. We weren't able to counter it. It was a massacre. Our sisters and friends dropped dead by the hundreds. Almost all the gifted perished. And then the ships descended, as if falling from the sky. I was there when Valley Bay burned. My Soroi, she died when the council keep fell. All that's left of the ancient stronghold is dust and debris, broken rooms, and hidden spaces filled with shadows. In the end, we were victorious, I suppose, though it hardly felt that way. Through magic and military tactics, we fought back, forcing the Terrans off Aggar. But the cost was great. Perhaps too great. Our seers are dead now. I fear the blue sites are lost forever. Valley Bay is ash, and my sisters are scattered. The residents of Aggar have blamed the invasion on the Amazons and hunt us down, trying to remove all non-natives from their brutalized land. I hear rumors on the wind. There are sympathetic tribes in the deserts, willing to hide the sisters of Desorormin. I intend to find them, if I can survive the journey. Perhaps some of my sisters have found safe harbor there as well. We have been on Aggar now for centuries. My ancestors were born and raised here. I thought we were one people, that we were one with this world. But angry eyes still mourning, see us no differently than the Terrans that wanted to pillage Aggar for her resources. I pray to the goddesses that this record is found in a more peaceful time, that sisters who come after me will discover these words and be amazed that Aggar, our Aggar, was once so hostile to our kind. Part 1. One Shard Called Honor. Chapter 1. A winged shadow rippled up across the sheer rock of the embankment. The shape veered off, falling from those jagged cliff tops, then reappeared. With a sudden drop, the small winged cat fell through an air pocket, and briefly she relished the coolness of cleaner scents, until the heat rose to catch and lift her again. The golden tips of her sable fur ruffled in the caress of that ill wind. The Etah banked to the north, away from the escarpment, seeking altitude before circling back. The new horizon did not offer her much greater solace. The great gaping holes of the fire caps spewed in the north, orange bleeding in a mire of swirling black. The volcanic land stretched to infinity, and the winds it sent south were tainted with a sulphurous stench. The air was blistering hot and grubby with ash. There was grit that tasted of carbon and sand. It was not a place fit for human nor beast. The Etah whirled to search once again that nearly featureless rock of the embankment. The barrenness was uninviting, and her scrutiny of that faint upper trail would have been wasted other times. But today, she was rewarded in finding the Amazon's small caravan. A pair of stub-tailed sandwolves, taupe and beige in fur, with massive shoulders tapering to slim hips, shambled along well ahead of the horses. Long trained as scouts, the canines moved with their heads hung low and swinging from side to side as they loped along, being cautious of scents that may or may not be found. The shadow of the Etah passed before them, and they halted, lifting high, blunted muzzles of hairless hide. Eyes as clear as the sands of their ancestral southern continent reflected a quiet intelligence. They recognized their winged visitor. The smaller of the sandwolves turned and trotted back along the trail, while the other continued forward. The horses behind were plodding along with heads down, bent into the winds, and they paid no heed to the sky above, nor to the sandwolf returning from the front. There were 3 mares. Each of them was well-muscled, broad in the chest and square in build, and each was a blood bay of rich, ruddy red with high black stockings to match both mane and tail. They were obviously not simple pack animals, and in fact even the packs on the leading pair seemed too small and light to be of much consequence. Instead of canvassed packs, the 3rd mare carried a lone Amazon. Dusty ash had obliterated the color of her long coat-like garments. Her hood and scarf were equally as layered with gray. The dozing slouch of her shoulders and the size of her mare belied her true height. But right now, there were no raiders to warn off with impressions here. Nothing was ever very exciting, unless, of course, Darkfall found one still astride a beast and still leagues from the shelters. Then it could become all too exciting along these steep paths. A sudden shriek rent the afternoon stillness. The sandwolves spun, noses to the air. The Amazon wakened, sword half unsheathed. Again came the cry. The haunting echo blew apart, heart-piercing and unsettling in its humanness. But it was only one of the men-cat. Both the sandwolves and Amazon breathed easier as the sword was resheathed. They were in no danger from those mournful beasts. There was no way down from the upper heights onto this trail. Besides, no matter how savage the Etah males were, one lone men-cat would have had no chance against the larger sandwolves. The smaller sandwolf waited until the horses finally began to pass her. Then, crouching, she darted beneath the last mare's belly to the rider's right, protectively placing herself between her favored human and that fathomless precipice of the trail's edge. The Amazon pulled the scarf down from her face and leaned over, curious of the sandwolf's appearance. The creature whined, then with a single yap tossed her head up, and the woman's copper gaze went skyward. The female Etah, was circling again. With a muttered half-oath, the woman recognized the messenger of Valley Bay. It was no wonder the wailing men-cat had awakened. With rueful disgust, she glanced at those fire-caps in the north. Because of them, the air currents were too dangerous for the winged cat to risk landing on this trail. She twisted behind, looking for bearings, then ahead, and confirmed they were indeed near the end of this isolated stretch. Soon, barely shy of 2 leagues, the path would cut south through this ascending cliff, and a league after that they would drop beyond the scent of sulphur and find the southern gatehouse. Whatever was happening, the news would best wait until that hearth was reached. News. What could be good? It was always a risk sending the winged cats to any of these ranges during the spring mating season. Resigned, the Amazon waved the airborne messenger on, then touched her heel to the bay. The Sandwolf bounded forward to herd the pack mares along faster, and the small troop picked up their pace. There had been enough napping. It would be better not to tempt the fates so soon in this journey. It appeared there would be enough opportunity for that later. Darkfall had not quite reached the southern side of the embankment as the group rounded the high rocks which marked the haven of the Gatehouse Canyon. It wasn't much of a canyon, but it was large enough to corral a good dozen beasts and to support a stone cottage to house as many riders. The horses livened their steps at the smell of fresh water, and the sandwolves shambled aside to let them pass. The rider swatted at her sleeveless coat and hood, sending up clouds of dust in the twilight, and bringing forth the bright copper-bronze color of the fabric, with the golden threads and buttons of its quilting. The larger of the sandwolves sneezed, shaking her head with squinting eyes and a huff or two as the dust threatened to engulf her. Laughter rang clear as the Amazon uncovered herself, pushing her hood back as the youngest sandwolf sneezed again. She shook her hair loose, its copper shade exactly the match of her sparkling eyes. It was an unruly tousle, tied back at the nape of her neck, caught in the folds of scarf and hood. "You would do well to trot a wider circle, Ty," she teased, and the older sandwolf, Rill, expressed her agreement with a drooling, long-toothed grin. The sound of her voice brought another sister from the stone hut, a tall figure clad in plainer garments of green and tan. She carried a wooden bucket of grain for the horses, but her empty hand lifted in a friendly greeting. "Mother's blessings, Royal Marshal." "Marshal indeed," taunted the newcomer. "Have I been gone so long, Tana?" The horses drew nearer in the dimness, and a sudden smile brightened the other's face. "Gwyn, I didn't recognize you bundled so neat. Come in, Sorroway. So late in crossing? You're lucky to have made it. I was sure you must be a lowlander or some sister returning. What makes you dally? Or have you done the 2 days crossing in one?" "In truth, I did just that." And the young woman sighed as she stepped down from the stirrup. The saddle creaked, and the bay, Cinder, grunted in relief, as the girth uncinched for the first time since dawn. Tana squinted, her dark eyes shrewd as they took measure of her guest. The lines in Gwyn's face underlined her fatigue. Between the grit and the apricot gold of her skin, the creases seemed almost to be worked into wood. Gwyn was a royal marshal by trade, as her bright copper-bronze coat declared. She was Niachero, daughter of the stars, by birth, as her height and tan attested, but she was a young sister, too. 27, by the reckoning of the ancient home stars, or 13 in some, by the 10 moons of Aggar. Not so very old, and not so very young. Yet, Tana noted the weary tightness about her lips, and that all-too-knowing squint about her eyes. That sensitive, assessing face should have belonged to someone much older. It wasn't fair, Tana thought, even without knowing what the duty was this time. Gwyn was too young to be cheated of her own youth. But then, Niachero were born with that bittersweet brilliance, that stubbornness of ability, to carry what must be carried. "Has the Ita arrived?" Gwyn asked abruptly, stripping the red leather saddle from her mare and heaving it onto the corral's stony fence. Aye, it was Sable, but she wouldn't wait to take an answer. Tawna felt her throat close with momentary despair. The business must be more serious than she had feared if the Etah was sent out so quickly after Gwyn's home departure. Then, with a sudden shake of her head, Tawna gathered her resolve and opened her arm to hug the taller woman close. Gwyn was Niachero. She could take care of herself. Surprised, Gwyn returned the embrace and looked at her friend questioningly. Nena? Rash fool, Tawna muttered, her mouth curling with a strained smile. We both. And her eyes glinted with an old teasing. The sudden strength of Gwyn's mischief broke Tawna's misgivings like a prism does sunlight, and the woman caught her breath. Gwyn laughed as the bucket of grains was suddenly dropped at her feet. Tawna shook her head, striding away with an exasperated cry. See to your poor beasts. A single day's crossing? They've been abused enough without waiting for their feed as well. Do you ever get tired of being alone? Gwyn murmured, half lost in her own world. And Tawna smiled gently, brushing the feathery copper from Gwyn's forehead as they lay. Gwyn's attention shifted, returning from that faraway place, and worry etched faint furrows between her eyebrows. How do you manage? They were wrapped in a soft spun blanket, the fire in the hearth flickering with a heartwarming glow that echoed the tenderness of the touch they had shared. The small cottage smelled of wood smoke and herbs, far cries from the musty ash of sulphur in those distant heights. It was a good place to find refuge, and it reflected the woman's care and welcome. But tonight, the sister's gatekeeper was not to be deluded by her dear companion's rhetoric, and Tawna's head shook with a sympathetic smile. You're missing Selena, then? A pause, a sigh, and a weary denial closed Gwyn's copper-hued eyes. I wish it were simply that. Tawna studied her carefully. It's almost been a 10 moon and a half, Gwyn. Eyes opened, blurred with tears. She nodded. Has there been no other? At Tawna's concern, Gwyn offered a fond smile. You count yourself so little, Soroe? No, but I count myself as your dear friend, Tawna returned solemnly. Not as your heart-bound companion. Truth, she sighed faintly. No, there has been no heart bond since Selena. Tawna nodded, realizing she had always known this. Gwyn was a woman of intense, committed passions. Their time together would have changed, altered from loving rapport to gentle companionship, if someone that special had come along. Gwyn was not capable of losing herself in one woman's arms for long, if her heart was entwined with another. It takes time to heal, Tawna added belatedly. What you had with Selena is rare. It will not be easily replaced. It will never be replaced, Gwyn corrected hollowly. No, but there are as many ways in loving as there are women to love. I know that. It is a hard thing to remember through death's empty wake. A slow breath passed her lips, and Gwyn shook her head vaguely. It is perhaps that I am more frightened of awakening such feelings again, Tawna. The intensities, the depths given with such heart bonds. But still, how do you bear the loneliness? For me, it is not lonely, Tawna murmured, the truth of it reflecting in her gentle gaze. We are different. Our needs are different. You are meant to follow passion and bright stars, while I I'm content to watch the twin moons, to sing with my lute and pray with my poetry. This rocky alcove offers a priestess's seclusion for me, dear Gwyn. It is not lonely. It's merely my home." Gwyn thought about that, listening to the whispering winds as they stirred through the mountains. For a moment, she could almost imagine the stars swirling, dancing in the moon's light beyond that rough-hewn roof. Still, it was only a glimpse of what her companion embraced, and she knew again the differences they would never breach. "I think it is not only the companionship you are missing," Tawna mused, watching Gwyn's face closely. "Perhaps it is the intimacy of the blue sight as well?" Gwyn laughed with a sudden shout, and her friend grinned at her. "Intimacy? What a delicate word from you, Tawna. Aren't you meaning naked exposure? Sheer lack of privacy? Isn't it always you who maintains that to love a blue sight is to drop every barrier to the depths of the soul?" "Well, perhaps I lack that particular sort of courage. After all, I am not Niachero." No. Gwyn sobered, remembering just how many women were frightened by the very passions that would bind their hearts to another's life. It hurt to remember those who had turned from her own offer because of that fear. "And," Tawna reminded her with a teasing smile, "I was not raised with a mother and a sister of the sight. My hermit-like ways would have been quite lost in that sort of household, don't you think?" "In truth." Also, Selena was gifted with years as well as sight. You held much to treasure there. Again, Gwyn had to agree. Yet, why now? Tawna probed, concern reflected with fond love as she tipped Gwyn's face upward. "What has happened to bring on this soul-searching, Sorroway?" Gwyn shrugged, growing almost off-handed as she turned to slide her arms about Tawna's smooth shoulders. "I go to escort a blue sight. Perhaps the thought has made me nostalgic?" Tawna felt her lips curl in amusement as Gwyn's soft mouth claimed her. She knew better than to pry, but she wasn't about to object to the delicious distractions either. Off in the darkness, Cinder gave an annoyed snort and stomp. Gwyn glanced up from her whittling, squinting to make out the wavering shapes beyond the fire. She could see nothing. A warm muzzle laid itself down across her knee in reassurance, and the Amazon grinned. She gave Rill a fond rub down her furry backbone. "So, our bondmate finally returns from her hunt. Think she'll behave herself for a day or two?" Rill answered with a vague whine of doubt. With her head still in Gwyn's lap, the sandwolf twisted, brows high, as she searched expectantly. Obligingly, Ty padded out of the darkness to join them. Her cold nose bumped lightly against Gwyn's cheek, and then Rill's. "Good eve to you too, young ruffian," Gwyn grunted as the tardy sandwolf flopped to the ground and rolled her weight into her human. With a good-natured chuckle, Gwyn accepted her role in life as a backrest. She gave the great beast a pat on the stomach and a hearty hug. Ty grinned back over a furry shoulder at Gwyn. It was a toothy, comical grin at that upside-down angle. "I'm glad you ate well. I'm even happier to have you safely in camp. But what were you doing to poor Cinder?" Ty flipped to her belly and cheerfully refused to answer. Panting, with feigned ignorance, she stared off into the dark. Thought so." Rill politely moved her nose as Gwyn resumed working on the small flute. The campfire crackled, and its noise blended easily with the stirring night sounds. A yellow cricket awoke somewhere, and soon its chirping had roused the neighbors from their leafy beds. One of the mares shifted her weight, rustling the twigs and such underfoot. Rill moved closer to keep Gwyn's leg warm as a wayward breeze tried to make the spring chill chillier. But Gwyn's thoughts were on the note Missormi's Ita had delivered to the gatehouse for her. Her mother had heard from the contacts at the royal court, and their discreet inquiries had only confirmed Gwyn's suspicions. Neither the king nor the crowned rule, his daughter, had received any news of the unrest in Kirlan. They were not ignoring the Dracoon's pleas for help. The royal house was simply unaware of her needs, which supported the unsettling probability that there was a traitor among the Dracoon's own scribes. Either that, or the Dracoon was downright paranoid, and Gwyn's mother would have seen something odd if such were the case. But as Gwyn thought back to that evening with Miss Orme, she remembered her mother's trust in the Dracoon. No, Brianna had seen no Amarin of madness, only of desperation. The whitewashed walls of the garden were bathed in orange by the setting sun. The woman's red hair was afire as well, though she was ignorant of its sheening colors. She'd bound it back in a thick braid to stay out of the way as she tended the rose bushes. Her hands were protected by thick gloves, but her movements were efficient and unhindered by either her gloves or her heavy apron. The emerald robes she wore beneath the gardening apron suggested that scrounging around on her knees in the mulch was not her usual pastime. Shadows began to lengthen. The globe lamps along the walls and paths gradually brightened, subtly fending off the twilight, just as the climate control kept the icy ting of the new spring away. Heedless of time, the woman worked on until finally a shadow did intrude. A faint smile creased the corners of her blue eyes, although she never stopped in her task. "You're working late, Miss Orme?" "I started late." She finished to her satisfaction and looked up at the tall, strong figure of her birth daughter. As always, Brianna thought how like her beloved this daughter looked, and as always, she felt pride stir for those two Amazons of her family. Like Jess, this daughter possessed the height and strength of their foremothers. Like Jess, Gwyn tanned lightly from the sun. The only thing that bespoke of Brianna's own blood was the hair, but even that had become uniquely Gwyn's. A fairer red and finer than Brianna's, it tended to unruliness if the curls worked free from the short braid. That disarray was again more reminiscent of Jess's dark locks. That infectious, familiar grin challenged her silent assessment. Brianna relented and set aside her trowel. She accepted the offered hand as she went to rise, ruefully conceding how stiff age and gardening had made her this evening. "I began late because the ring met overlong this afternoon. Too many concerns for our sisters who will be returning from the Changelings' wars. This summer season will not be an easy one for Valley Bay, I fear." And as usual, they expected the ring binder to magically provide all the answers. Brianna nodded, patient humor sparkling in her eyes. "There is a certain assumption that since the blue sight shows me what event is to happen, it must naturally also tell me how to deal with that event." "Yet it's just the opposite," Gwyn murmured. She gave her mother an arm to lean on as they turned for the house. Despite the creamy smoothness of Brianna's face, her daughter knew how age-worn the seasons as ring binder had made this woman. "It is a worry," Brianna continued, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "The wars have robbed so many of them, of limbs, of trust, of hope. We spent hours with the Nishay crones of home, searching for records and methods of dealing with these battle stresses. I believe our own House Nishay found some of it useful. I hope so, anyway." "But it leaves you tired, using your sight to cross that starry chasm of time and space." Brianna shrugged. Gwyn placed an arm about her mother's shoulders, and a grateful, if amused, smile appeared. "And who comforts who here?" Gwyn only hugged her gently. "Then think of me as Niachero, not as your eldest." Brianna laughed beneath her breath. They entered the house, and as Brianna crossed the room to sink gratefully into the depths of the great couch, Gwyn unfolded the slatted doors that separated the house and gardens. She paused to be certain the outer lights were dimming off, then turned to kindle the wood laid in the fireplace. "You sent for me?" Gwyn reminded her mother softly, settling back against the side of the hearth. She watched, in silent concern, as Brianna wearily shrugged out of the work apron. Not for the first time, Gwyn thought that it was fortunate Nisormi would be coming home this summer with the rest of the veterans. Brianna seemed to tire less easily when Jess was near to lend her strength. "Would you like some tea, Miss Orme?" "No." Brianna raised a brow, irony touching some inner thought, which she finally shared. "Do you know how many kettles of tea I've consumed today?" Gwyn laughed quietly. "We should ask Kimmery to send down a few kegs of her orchard juices, offer you a change of taste." "Your little sister has enough to worry about right now. Calving season is beginning for our beasties, remember?" "Aye, no." Gwyn stretched out her booted feet, with a deliberate slowness to the motion that was not lost on her mother. "I'd forgotten." "You are treating me like I'm made of fragile glass." "Sometimes, perhaps you are. Sometimes, perhaps I'm not." Gwyn acknowledged that with a tip of her head. "I'd never contest your strength." A rich, soft laugh eased much of the weariness in the older woman. "In some ways, you are very much my daughter, always the diplomat." Eyes widened in mock surprise. "Miss Orme, am I not always your daughter?" "No." A quite composed blue gaze fell to Gwyn, though Brianna was careful, as always with her blue sight, not to actually lock glances. "Often you are Jess's own." "Never." They laughed together at that, companionable in the way loving seasons and simple respect had created. Then, slowly, the stillness came to wrap about them. Gwyn bent a knee and rested her chin atop it, hands folded about her ankle, and her copper eyes studied her mother. Once more, she prompted, "You sent for me. Was it because of something that happened within the ring? Or something that comes from our sisters, of the home planet?" "Neither, really. A few days ago I had a visitor. Well, not precisely a visitor. A Harmon. And now I find I have need of a royal marshal." That startled Gwyn a bit. There weren't many blue sights talented enough to project their Harmon, that ghost image of themselves, across great distances to another blue sight receptor. It was a necessary talent in the ringbinder who was often the sole link between the sisters of Aggar and their distant homeworld, but even the council's seers were not always so gifted. Curious, Gwyn pressed. "The visitor was from the council? No? From the royal family in their western palace? Or the prince's northern field camps?" "From Kirlan." "Kirlan? The most southeastern district of the Remains?" Gwyn's chin dropped with a contemplative frown. "I've never heard of any trouble from them, but they have been pretty isolated during the wars. Being so far south and inland, it's always been more economical for them to provide extra tax monies rather than armed support for the prince. I don't think they've even got a standing regiment among his northern troops. But then, the king and crowned rule still endorse the old law for border districts, and with the clan's plateau being Kirlan's neighboring, the clan! Understanding dawned as the Amazon sat bolt upright. The old law exempted Kirlan from royal conscriptions specifically because of the Terran clan's threat to the Remains realm. They send Churv money instead of sword carriers because the swords are simply needed in Kirlan. Between the continual raids and the occasional invasions of the clan, the Kirlan folk are in a constant struggle and have always had to maintain an active militia." "Well, apparently," Brianna amended somberly, "the last few seasons have only seen Kirlan's struggle grow worse." With a grim frown, Gwyn nodded. She knew all too well what must have happened. The clan finally capitalized on the fact that the prince's troops were occupied on the northern borders. The clan leads realized the royal family wouldn't be able to send reinforcements, and decided to see what they and their fire weapons could gain from it. So it would seem. Miss Orme? Curiously, Gwyn glanced at her mother. It was odd that Valley Bay's ringbinder had become involved in this sort of matter. Who was this visitor? The King's Dracoon of Kirlan. She or he? She. Her name is Linole. She came to you, and not to the crowned rule? Or even to the Council of 10? Surely the council has jurisdiction over the clan's affairs. We're only interested bystanders. Ones which the clan would prefer did not exist, Brianna concluded succinctly. So why does the Dracoon seek you out? It was unintentional. Her brow creased in a scowl, and Gwyn sat forward in disbelief. Her blue sight aired? That's not possible, surely. Only the council's own seers know Valley Bay well enough to find you here in this place, and they would never mistake here for the king's court. Her blue gift aired, Brianna returned calmly. Her own, not a seer's apprentice stationed within her court. There's a Dracoon gifted? Gwyn had never heard of king nor council arranging such a thing. It's certainly a novel idea. I can imagine where it might be useful in foreseeing some of the clan's antics. But still, Miss Orme, you are always reminding us that the site's talents lend information rather than knowledge. Having a Dracoon incapable of strategy or deduction is somewhat limiting, isn't it? The subtle curve of an almost secretive smile was Brianna's only response. Gwyn recognized that expression. She sighed. Often, when her mother saw something of the future that was best left ambiguous, she got that vague, pleased look. It was useless to press further. Instead, Gwyn changed tack. Who had she been trying to reach, Miss Orme? De Sorormin, of our homeworld, a sister Nashe, and one Naathina. Of home? She's a sister, then? How? There's never been a sister governing as a remains Dracoon. She is not a daughter of Valley Bay, Gwyn, but she has been accepted by both her mentors Nashe and Naathina as a foster daughter. She has some claim to us, and our help. Brianna let her daughter absorb that for a moment, then elaborated. My garden, with its roses and greens of home, is apparently very similar to the garden of her mentor, Nashe. As happens, when we grow tired, however, she found she could not see across the stars. So this garden, which is so very foreign to Aggar, and my own blue sight, drew her here instead. A wry grin sprouted as Gwyn muttered, Wager she was shocked to find herself still under blue skies and not beneath lavender. She was frightened, a bit. Of you? And she with the sight? Gwyn was genuinely alarmed. Miss Orme, what were you doing? Snipping the winter roses back. No, it was not my Amarin that dismayed her. It was the risk that the council might learn of her visit. She has asked me not to involve them. I chose to respect her reasons, although she did not explicitly share them. Which means she impressed you, and we should trust her. Given her mother's blue gift, Gwyn didn't question that decision. So now you send for me instead. You are of Remain's royal marshal, daughter, one of the crowned rule's emissaries, judge and protector. I had assumed you'd be riding out for duties again this spring. Ah, and I see I am right. As a marshal, I thought, well, it occurred to me that the problems of Kirlan's Dracoon is foremost the royal family's business. Clan raiders are threatening the welfare of the Remain's realm, The people's safety is more important than council's policies, is it not? Wouldn't it be prudent for a royal marshal to investigate? Do you know how well the crowned rule has been kept informed of these clan troubles? Does it matter? Brianna was not ignorant of the neighboring realm's politics. When the crowned is preoccupied, the marshals tend to the important matters as things arise. Since when do they wait for royal directives? We don't. Then you wonder at something else. For a moment, Gwyn considered that uneasy feeling inside, her chin once again atop her knee. Finally, her thoughts ushered themselves together, and she found the inconsistencies that teased her. You want to know more of this dracoon, Linole? Yes, I do. Gwyn gave a wry grin. Her mother's blue sight was as perceptive as usual. You say she wants no involvement of the council in this. That's fair. They are certainly passive enough with their patient diplomacy to try anyone's nerves, especially when one is dealing with a military threat. And I don't know of anyone who'd deny that the clan and their horde of fire weapons could create a military nightmare. But what I don't understand is how a blue sight came to be Dracoon of Kirlan, if the council wasn't involved. I mean, Monsieur me, I intend no disrespect, but you are the ring binder, and not an appointed official for a reason. Aye. Brianna smiled indulgently. I see details upon details in the ever-flowing life cycles around us. I bind the ring of Valley Bay to our homeworld by traversing the glowing paths of Amaran that connect the blue sights of Aggar to home. I read the pieces and share the images, the impressions of life, and rarely can I be objective about those things that I see, because I feel them in the perceiving. It would make me a very poor leader in many circumstances. I would forever be biased in favor of the stronger personalities. Although that sensitivity makes you an excellent judge of character, it would be a tremendous liability in a leader. Ah, Brianna nodded. I understand your uneasiness now. You trust that she is of admirable character, because I can see this in her Amaran. But you question the sanity of those who appointed her Dracoon. Because of her sight, she could so easily fall prey to bad advice from trusted advisors. Yes, because of her sight. Even the most obvious threats could be disguised by passionate, righteous intentions. And yet she was appointed as a district's Dracoon? But she was not appointed, Gwyn. She has always been the Dracoon of Kirlan. Gwyn tipped her head aside in confusion. Then, with a mental shake, she realized that because of the sight, Brianna was so cognizant of the details of this Dracoon's life that she could not comprehend Gwyn's own lack of knowledge. Gwyn nearly laughed at that. Copper-bright eyes returned to Brianna's bemused figure. All right, Miss Orme, if she was not appointed, how did she, with her blue sight, become Kirlan's Dracoon? Quite simply, no one knows she has the blue sight. Gwyn, this Linole holds her title by birthright. Her family has governed the Kirlan district for generations. As the eldest and only child fathered by Madel of Kirla, naturally she became the Dracoon when he died. No one had reason to contest it. No one had reason? Miss Orme, how could no one notice? She has the blue sight. Her eyes are blue. Who on Aggar has ever had blue eyes without the gift? Children of the clan folk occasionally are blue-eyed, and they have never possessed the sight, Gwyn. And despite the clan's self-imposed isolationism of generations, there have been some minglings and marriages throughout Kirlan. Some, but it's been a guarded, reluctant mingling at best, and still the offspring with that mixed blood have never been blue-eyed without the sight. Miss Orme, you know this. Brianna considered that a moment, vaguely realizing she had known of that fact, but the young Dracoon's belief had led her to forget the obvious. She smiled at herself in wry amusement, explaining. The people of Kirla believe differently. Linole's mother was a clan refugee that Madel aided and eventually married. When Linole was born, no one found it strange that she had her mother's eyes. When she displayed no obvious signs of the gift, why should those of Kirlaw's court have questioned her lack of sight? Maudel didn't even know? Gwyn pressed, suspiciously. No one knew. To this day, no one outside de Sorormin knows she has the blue sight. That can't be. Gwyn was genuinely puzzled. There would have been childhood accidents with illusions from dreams and nightmares. Or was her clan mother of mixed blood and a blue sight herself? No, her mother was not sighted. Linole hid her own sight, without aid from any other. Brianna shrugged. She did not wish to leave her family and home to study with strangers at the council's keep. She preferred to study with her mentors, Nishay and Naathina. Gwyn was not satisfied. The inconsistency was still glaringly disconcerting to her, and she leaned forward, urging her mother to see the anomaly for herself. She was only a child, Miss Orme. The sight begins to emerge even as a child begins to speak. How could one so young have the skill to hide anything? No, it was instinctive. It was... She wished to hide, Gwyn. Brianna broke off in frustration, unable to use words to describe such an Amarin. Miss Orme. Gwyn moved swiftly to her mother's side, clasping her hands and bending to one knee, as she forced Brianna to face her. Show me, please. The solution became easy, and the older woman smiled with gentle gratitude. Then fingers took Gwyn's chin and held her lightly as blue eyes met copper and gazes locked. Gwyn shuddered. Brianna blinked, releasing her immediately. Gwyn shuddered again, shaking the shock away even as her mother's hand steadied her. She drew a deep breath, only to loosen it with a rush and take another. She rose shakily to take a seat on the couch beside Brianna and forced a crooked grin. I understand a little better. She has a powerful gift. Gwyn nodded. And powerful motivation. Brianna agreed. Even a lesser gift would have been harnessed instinctually with that. With that sort of desperation? Gwyn supplied. Brianna frowned before cautiously allowing... In the beginning, perhaps it was a sort of desperation. Yet, as she grew, it changed. Perhaps Linole was not as desperate as she was desperately passionate in her beliefs. In her convictions, she trusted her parents' love and their desire to give her the best by keeping her in Kirlaw with family. Convictions? Gwyn thought of that engulfing, consuming sweep of need that Brianna's blue sight had allowed her to experience. Deep within her, the resounding chord of Niachero awoke, and she shivered all over again. There had never been a blue-sighted Niachero. Gwyn's heart went racing at the sheer thought. She cleared her throat uncomfortably and glanced at her mother. Did these mentors she had, the Nishay and Naathina, did they ever challenge her choice of hiding? I don't know. Gwyn noticed the idea intrigued Brianna and prompted quickly. Could you ask them? Perhaps find out a bit more about her abilities and... Jess suggested, too, that I try and reach them. Brianna interrupted with quiet amusement, knowing she was guilty of being a mother who'd forgotten just how old her daughter had become. But only after Jess scolded me. Oh? Yes, she first reminded me that there are 2 marshals in this family, and that you're the one with the experience when it comes to civic district duties. She's the one with the tarnished battle sword from the north. A brief grin flickered across the Niachero's face before, You've already talked to Linole's mentors, then? No, I could not. Brianna sighed, wearied again by the limitations of her earlier work with the ring and now by this. She is a powerful blue sight, Gwyn, perhaps even more so than I. She's been successful in hiding her gift from the seers for more than 13 seasons. She reached our homeworld using her out-of-time seeing without anyone's guidance, and she did it as a mere child. To follow her, Gwyn, I couldn't even find her in Kirla when I went searching. I know she's there. I know her Amren, her Harmon, and yet still she can hide from me. Her ability, the scope of her raw talent is amazing. Brianna finished in a helpless shrug. Gwyn, I don't know of any sister who has ever trained a woman like this. I have absolutely no idea who she's been tutored by. That they are Nashe and Na'athena, I do not doubt. Her Sororian is too flawless. But there are small oddities in some of her dialect that I can't place with any Sororian I know. Which means the dialect's either very, very old or not yet used. Gwyn saw the problem finally. Her out-of-time seeing allowed her to reach across the stars to De Soronmin, but she's not necessarily speaking with mentors of our time, is she? Aye, Brianna agreed. It's more likely that her mentors are long dead, and to counter our neighbors in the Council's keep, many of our Blue Sight sisters do not believe in influencing future generations by documenting visits from out-of-time Harmons. Understandable. Gwyn nodded at the familiar concept. Neither Messormi nor Selena had ever liked discussing those occasional glimpses of future possibilities. Still, in regards to Linole, she could have hoped for more. Or perhaps not. Gwyn straightened, mentally sorting through all Brianna had told her. And in the end, everything became very simple. Somewhere, sometime, on the homeworld, Linole had earned the acceptance of two sisters, and she now asked Brianna for help. As an Amazon, Gwyn could not refuse her plea. In this time, on Aggar, and in their neighboring realm, the Dracoon of Kirla needed help. As a royal marshal in the hired service to Remain's royalty, Gwyn must answer the Dracoon's call. Abruptly, she turned back to Brianna. I've still got 2 questions. The older woman nodded for her to continue. What, if anything, does the royal family know of their Dracoon's plight in Kirlan? Linole believes those in Churv ignore her pleas. Initially she reasoned the Changelings' wars were responsible for their silence, since so many of the Remain's resources had to be committed to that defense. Yet, now that the wars are over, she still receives no response. Gwyn, I do not understand this. It made no sense to me, nor to Jess, that the crowned rule shouldn't at least send her advisors. You yourself are testimony to the fact that the royal marshals are still available, have been available throughout the wars, to aid and advise in all disputes. It makes no sense. Gwyn agreed. There was no reason for the king's daughter to isolate Kirlan. Unless... Gwyn asked abruptly, did you think to speak with your sighted contacts in Churv? Can they tell you if the royal family is getting anything from the Kirlan court? The usual records, their tax monies? Anything at all? Yes, I did. Jess had me talk to them. They say there are regular reports still arriving from Kirlan. There's been no word nor rumor in Churv that Linole is in need of any help, though. I've some discreet inquiries being made for us, but it will be a few days before I'll see more. There was probably nothing more to find in Churv, Gwyn mused. If there was not even a rumor that Kirlan was having difficulty with the clan, it seemed pretty clear that the reports were being tampered with, long before they reached the royal family. And that meant Linole had a traitor, somewhere very close to home, most likely within her scribes. All right. Gwyn drew a deep breath. That answers my second question. What kind of help does she want? Obviously, she needs to uncover the traitor in Kirla's court. No. Brianna shook her head decisively. She asks for aid in establishing a new balance with the clan folk. A new balance? A peace treaty? Gwyn scowled and tipped her head aside. How does she propose going about that? The clans haven't acknowledged council with anyone in nearly 3 generations. She knows. She is proposing one of 2 things. Either a peaceful exchange of land or resources. It's bad enough to consider giving the clan more territory? Aye, they've taken to burning whole villages with their fire weapons, Gwynnel. The clans closed the northeast trade route seasons ago. Since then, they've cut deeper west, strangling off nearly all of the northern exchanges. And last summer, they began to harass even the western routes. Main poor, it has become bad. Yet if a peaceful exchange cannot be negotiated, what does she hope to try? She'll destroy their cache of fire weapons. Gwyn balked at the enormity of that idea. The most audacious attempts in the past had never even discovered the location of the clan's armory. Certainly the council's seers could discern that easily enough, but the council had always refused to aid in an assault against the clans. The council usually refused to aid in any kind of aggressive assault, not just those against the clan. Instead, the council kept gently suggesting to the clan folk that they melt down their alloys and use it for more prosperous trade ventures. But culturally, those fire weapons had become a symbol to the clan folk of their strength and off-worlder heritage. A symbol of bullies, Gwyn thought grimly. A symbol that their mounted warriors had come perpetually to abuse and pillage and plunder. It would not be an easy task, Brianna observed quietly. But it's one Jess has agreed to. As do I, Gwyn returned. The northern folk didn't deserve the changeling's attack, and the people of Kirlan do not deserve the clan's renewed abuses. No, if there is no success in arranging a peaceful balance, then perhaps it is time the clan forfeit their precious hoard. So you will ride to join Jess in Grande? And then south with her, to Kirlan. Brianna nodded as her eldest stood, and Gwyn brushed a kiss of farewell along her mother's brow. I must tend to packing. I know. Brianna smiled with a gentle amusement that tempered the rising amarin of her melancholy. You have the same shimmer of excitement and tension Jess so held in her youth. This season has been an overly long winter in Valley Bay for you, hasn't it? Gwyn flushed a faint brown in admission, but her mother had taken no offense in the truth, and they had parted with that gentle understanding. Gwyn came out of her memories with a crooked smile and a chuckle. Rill's head lifted in a curious query, and Gwyn admitted, She always knows, doesn't she? The sandwolves tilted their heads, attentive and encouraging. Brianna, she'd noticed how restless I'd become. We all 3 had. I hadn't quite realized it yet, but I'd been looking forward to getting out of Valley Bay. I've missed the woods, the travel. Rill whined and nuzzled under Gwyn's arm. Her human gave her a hug, amending gently, And our time alone together, du mouse? Ty turned about, pushing into Gwyn's lap from the other side. The knife and wood were set aside as she was welcomed into the embrace. Aye, it's been a long, quiet wintering for all of us. A nice respite, but too much quiet and I get to feeling rather useless. Our skills are better suited to helping these outside folk than de Sorormin, it would seem. In response, Rill sniffed. Gwyn was threatening to become much too serious, much too early in this trip. Rill exchanged a glance with Ty. They'd stop that. The 2 sandwolves suddenly clambered into Gwyn's lap, their wet tongues in her face. Laughing, she went over backwards beneath their furry heap.